This presentation, which is short by all standards, I mean, it's not going to take really more than half an hour, I guess. I entitled it Ongoing Evaluation in Basic and Secondary Education, and I subtitled it Assessment for Learning. It's not assessment of learning, because the document is to assess learning. I'm interested in assessment for learning, that is evaluating the document itself and what we as ELT practitioners can learn from, whether we are teachers or inspectors, what we can learn from that. I'll just give you an idea about the outline for this presentation. I'll start by a brief introduction. Afterwards, I'll just try to give you an idea about the general characteristics of the ongoing evaluation document. Then I'll go through the different components of the test, namely speaking, listening, reading, language, and writing. Then I'll try to be proleptic in the sense I'd like to orient my presentation towards the future and looking ahead, that is what we can do following this day seminar. There is things we can think about.
Slah, will you get a copy of this?
Yeah, I will. And then afterwards there will be a short conclusion, if you like. Now, what I wanted actually, when Siad Noor talked to me a week ago, if there is anything I could actually present for this seminar, I thought about thinking or rethinking about the document we are using right now. That is the ongoing evaluation document. And I thought that if we as ELT inspectors could bring in our personal insights into that document, if we could rethink that document in depth, then we could probably give a clearer view about our own practices as ELT inspectors or as teachers. So my procedure is twofold, if you like. There is the feedback on the present document, that is the way things are, state of the art, the way things are. But it's not just the feedback on what has been done so far, or the story so far. What I'm also interested in is the feed forward. That is, we should orient, or our eyes should be riveted towards the future. What we can do, what changes could we bring about as a group of ELT inspectors who are supposed to be decision takers somehow, because we are supposed to decide upon everything. Right, starting with the general characteristics of the document itself. Well, I think that the document has clear-cut and distinct components. We have reading, we have the listening, we have the language, we have the writing, we have the speaking test, and they are all there and they are distinct. And I feel that they are written somehow in a straightforward language, and we can tell this is reading, that there is no, if you like, overlap between reading here and language somewhere. I think they are clear-cut, they are written in straightforward language. In other words, this has to do with the validity itself, because when we read through the document, looking at the sub-skills targeted there, we can easily tell that the judgment that is targeted, we can get actually an idea about that. If we are testing, we can tell we are testing reading, we can tell we are testing listening, we can tell we are testing language from the tasks themselves. This is actually, I'm talking about the on plus side of the document itself. I also feel, I mean, I may be wrong, but I feel that the document itself is teacher-friendly, user-friendly. There is even, you don't need to be a seasoned teacher. Even if you are a novice teacher, reading through the document, you can devise a test, you can administer that test, you can mark that test, and I think it's quantifiable somehow. It's easily quantifiable. It is also written in clear language. I don't see really much jargonese in that. I don't feel there is really verbiage or wordiness. The language, the text itself, the document itself is straightforward. Let's start by, since we're just looking at the characteristics of the document, let's look at the number of test items. I'm really concerned about this. Number of test items we have. For example, for basic education, listening we have 10 items. For secondary school we also have 10 items. 10 items for listening, I mean, you know, it's scored out of 8, but you know, we have 2 items for spelling and 2 items for pronunciation. So all in all, we have 10 items. For the reading, we have for basic education from 5 to 6 items, secondary education 12 to 15 items for the arts branch. For language, we have for the mid-semester test, basic education, between 24 and 28 items, depending on the level. And for the end of semester test, we have 16 items. Secondary education, mid-semester test, 24 items. End of semester test, between 12 to 20 items. For the arts branch, 20 items. Writing, we have one task for the basic education. As for the secondary education, we have 1 to 2 tasks, depending on the test, whether this is an end of semester test or mid-semester test. For the speaking, we have 2 tasks, namely the speaking test or the oral test, plus the project work. This is actually what we have. Now, I'd like you to bear this in mind, and I'd like to compare this with what's going on by international standards. I mean, by what we have, on the international exams. I actually took the TOEFL Junior Standard Test, TOEFL Junior Comprehensive Test, the TOEFL and the TOEIC. These are example of tests. I'm going to compare these two, or I'll compare our tests to these. So for the TOEFL Junior Standard Test, this one is paper-based, buddy. It's pencil and paper test. This one, for the listening, we have 42 items. Reading, 42 items. Language, 42. All in all, we have something like 126 items for a test that lasts only 1 hour 55 minutes. And by the way, this one is closest to us because those students who take this exam are between the age of 11 up to 16 or 17. So more or less what we have in basic education and secondary education. For the TOEFL Junior Comprehensive Test, this one is computer-based. We have 36 items for listening, 36 for reading, 4 tasks for speaking, and 4 tasks for writing. This would add up to 80 items on the test, on a test that lasts 2 hours 14 minutes. For the TOEFL, we have 50 items for the listening, reading 50 items, 40 items for language and speaking because they say oral expression plus structure. So 40 items, 1 task for writing. This would make something like 141 items. Now the TOEIC, Test of English for International Communication, we have 100 items for listening, 100 items for reading, 11 items for speaking, and 8 items for writing. By 8 items, I mean 8 tasks. A task can be at the sentence level, for example, when you ask a student, for example, to describe a picture, is at sentence level, or it can be a task you ask the student to write an email or to write an essay because they reach an essay. And we have all in all 219 items for a test that lasts 2 hours 30 minutes for the first 2 skills, that is namely listening and reading, and 1 hour 30 for 11 items for the speaking and writing. Of course, it's mandatory that there should be a break of 15 minutes between the 2 tests, but it's on the same day we have 219 items. Now I let you conclude, colleagues. In terms of quantity, our tests are below all standards.
Yeah, the question of reliability.
We'll come to that. Yeah.
Can I just say?
Yeah, it's up to you. If you like to intervene now. Yeah, go ahead.
You are comparing something or 2 things that are incomparable.
Why so?
The TOEIC and the TOEFL are placement or positioning tests.
Right.
Okay, for students.
Okay.
They do not come after a cycle of learning.
Yeah.
They come just like that to
Right.
position certain recruiters or
Right.
a population for recruitment.
Right.
Okay. Whereas our tests, they are summative. They come after a long course
Right.
of learning, so
Right.
it's related to a certain corpus of learning, let's say course books or something like that.
Yeah, even for the talk, we
Yeah.
have something like 40
I
hours.
would rather like to compare, for example, our high-stake testing like the baccalaureate with the, for example, the baccalaureate in France, in England, in Algeria, in Morocco. Yeah.
Right. Actually, what I'm concerned about is that the number of items for reliability itself. I'm not talking about the quality of the item. I'm not talking about reliability of measurement when it comes to quality. I'm talking about that in terms when it comes to quantity. Then we are below all the standards, by the way. Yeah, it does not reflect quality, but it's part and parcel of reliability of measurement. Part and parcel. It's very important.
The longer, the more reliable.
Part of it,
The test is
yeah,
more reliable.
right. So here, quantity also matters. It's not just quality, because I believe that our tests, when it comes to items themselves, when it comes to the quality of the item itself, they are reliable to a certain extent. But when it comes to quantity, the range itself is not wide or diverse enough to enable us to see what students are capable of when it comes to the different skills, for example, in language. We do not have a clear idea. When you just come to, for example, the reading, and you just ask student to give you 15 items, does this give you an idea about different sub-skills, that whether the learner has managed to master these or not? Whether the learner can use all the strategies related, or most of the strategies relating to the reading or not. So, yeah.
There's another problem concerning even the test construction in the TOEFL and the TOEIC. Now you've got the discrete items.
Okay.
Discrete items do not require contextualization. So whereas in our tests you need to paragraph items to contextualize them.
Even for the
And I remember Mr. Néji, one of his worries was the question or the definition of a context. What is a context? How can things be, items can be contextualized or decontextualized? In such placement tests, context does not matter. What matters is the item itself, in its own context. So you've got discrete items.
You don't
Whereas
have just discrete items, Hussein, I'm sorry.
most
You
of the
also
time.
have- you
Most
also
of the
have-
time.
Yeah, Hussein, just
Yeah.
wait. You also have integrative testing in the TOEFL and the TOEIC. And by integrative testing, most of the time, I mean, one of the definitions is that we have a paragraph. And they do have paragraphs, but most of them are multiple choice. You see what I mean? It's not just, they do not just have discrete items. And I do actually, I can even show you a document here where you have an example, samples of tasks from the TOEIC and the TOEFL, where they have paragraphs, where they have integrative testing, what we call integrative testing.
Yeah, even IELTS.
Right, right. I mean, do you like to intervene now, or we just finish and then afterwards?
Finish first.
Let me finish, and then if you like, if you have any comments, we can just discuss it. Right, right. So I said there's a problem with with quantity, because the test itself, when it comes to reliability of measurement, there's a problem somewhere. There is not really a wide range of tasks from which to evaluate. There is, I mean, Henning argues, and let me read this for you. He says that for most paper and pencil EFL tests, it is difficult to achieve acceptable reliability, say 0.85 or above, with less than 50 items. This is particularly true with tests of listening comprehension. This is also true for tests of written or oral production that do not involve the use of items. For these tests as well, a sample of language usage must be elicited from the students that is both large enough and diverse enough in content to permit reliable measurement. I think the quote drives the message home. The number of items we have on our test is below all standards. Now, I mean, talking about our tests, whether those that are constructed by teachers in their classes or those that are standardized for the national exams, most of them have not really been dynamic, in the sense that they have not been really cumulative and building on these, but they have been really shrinking in nature. I mean, if you remember the first document, the first ongoing evaluation document, we started up with a wide range, or the good range, if you like, of items, and then we ended up eliding some, until now, over the years, we really have a narrow range to get tasks from. This, of course, would have a negative washback. If you have less tasks, if you test students on less sub-skills, this will have ramifications on how the curriculum itself is dealt with in classroom instruction itself, what teachers will deal with. So, and it gets narrower, and when the curriculum gets narrower, it gets impoverished. And this is what happened to the curriculum itself. We have a rather impoverished curriculum. The end result, it's quite obvious and expected. We need to narrow, and this is what happens, is that we narrow and reduce our expectations for the outcomes of schooling, for pedagogy within schools, and for the education system as a whole. I mean, we've been actually lowering the standards year after the other until we really now somehow do have a problem with the proficiency of our students. This out, I mean, I thought about this in these terms. It's like a downward spiral. I mean, there was this obsession with having good scores on the back exam. Particularly, I mean, it's political choices, if you like. We'd like to reach that 80%. It has become sort of obsession, developed kind of fixation on the 80%. What this led to is that we lower the standards to reach that. And when we lower the standards, the washback is obvious. I mean, the curriculum itself gets impoverished. And when the curriculum itself gets impoverished, and we still like to have better results, we lower the standard, we have lower proficiency level. And because students have lower proficiency level, and we'd like them to have better results, so we lower the standards again. And you can imagine, it has become like a free fall, if you like.
To the abyss.
Right? It's to, if you like, to the abyss. Right? I'll start with the speaking test. Now, on the document that we have there, on the plus side, I think that there is a clear statement for the speaking test in particular of what is expected of the targeted competence. We read from the document, the test will evaluate his, her ability, that is, the learner's ability, to express himself or herself correctly, clearly, audibly, in a way appropriate to the communicative situation. It's made quite clear to the learner that what is targeted is the communicative competence, not, for example, just linguistic competence. And this had a bearing on the way teachers administer speaking tests in their class. I mean, now we can see in our class that teachers always think of communicative situation, for example, in which they set the speaking test, to some extent, of course. What is also clearly stated is the type of assessment task. We expect from the learner that the test can be a dialogue, an interview, a report on something read, a summary of an oral or written text, an interpretation of pictures or tables, or a reconstruction of a story. It is also stated in the document itself that project work has to be there. And I can tell from my experiences, I've not been really for a long time in the job, but I can tell that now teachers are paying more attention to project work because it's on the document. Teachers now are asking for training in PBL because because they do have problem with this, because it's in the document. So this is one of the, it's a positive washback actually for this one. What is not mentioned, however, what is not clearly stated, for example, are the alternative evaluation tools. The portfolio, for example, is not mentioned in the document we have. And I think that this is one of the pitfalls, if you like, one of the minor problems with the document, if you like. I come now to the listening comprehension. I will join what our colleague said a while ago and say that the listening skill is the orphan skill. Orphan in the sense that it's not assessed on national exams. And you understand, if it's not assessed on the national exams, it will be seriously written out of serious consideration from teachers. Right. I mean, what they do is simply they read out the material from the tape script, or even on exam days, they read out from tape script. If there is no inspector there, most of the time they read out. So there is the negative pushback for this. This also has negative ramification for pronunciation itself. And pronunciation, I don't know, colleagues, you may disagree with me. I feel that it has been somehow discarded from our instruction in classrooms. With time, first of all, on the document, we only have 2 or 3 types of activities. And with time, this not only has a bearing on the students' level when it comes to pronunciation, but also on the teachers. I mean, see what teachers, I mean, do they know the minimal pairs? I mean, they probably know the minimal pairs, but ask them about homophones, phonetic transcription, thank you. Right? They do have problems. They have forgotten about this. Our colleagues who've been in the job in the 1980s were really excellent at teaching pronunciation because it was a component of that. Unfortunately, this is what happened. So, pronunciation has been one of the other reasons is that whether Whitley or unwittingly, I don't know, the communicative approach has somehow thrown pronunciation.
Pronunciation was dropped from our national exams based on the recommendation of outsider expert. I mean, they told us that pronunciation shouldn't be in the national exam.
And you see the negative pushback.
Why?
reason?
Namely Dave Allen.
His explanation. What was his explanation for that?
Because there is no standard level
No,
of
they say
assessing
that
pronunciation.
cannot be tested in written exams. It has to be tested when on
With the
oral
English
or with speaking.
in the speaking, as a speaking criteria, component. Not
Part of it. Now we're not concerned about the accents. We only are concerned about intelligibility in pronunciation, whether the learner is intelligible enough in pronunciation or not. But some explicit work on that in class is really of great help to
No, there is a
learners.
question of validity. I mean, if you are testing pronunciation, normally you have to listen to the speaker to test his ability to pronounce correctly or not. But if it's down on a paper, then you may test his ability to identify or recognize the appropriate to the transcription. But if you ask the same test taker, they will mispronounce the word that they put right in the test.
Right. There is much truth to that. In other words, if we do not actually, I'll come to some of the suggestions, but part of it would be of incorporating the skills of listening comprehension and speaking on exams. This is why, why I'm driving, if you like, the message too. Okay? So pronunciation, again, there is the negative washback. As I said, it's almost neglected from classroom instruction. Now, what if we are here to think, we are here to ask questions, we are here to just put things on the stall to stir the debate? So what if we incorporate a listening test on national exams? We probably need to talk about its practicality. In terms of time, in terms of human resources, in terms of logistics, everything. But we need to discuss these and talk about these. We'll see what was. They are doing that. We'll see what we can do, probably what comes from our discussion today and tomorrow. We need to think about.
Taking place. Testing, listening in our national exam. Is it ever taken place in the history of?
I don't know. Speaking, yes. Speaking was there, but listening, I'm not sure.
In Argentina, they're having a national test, listening on the radio, on the national radio.
They also mentioned other examples.
Where's it?
In Argentina, they have listening on the radio.
So we'll see what. Part of the listening comprehension component. If like to.
I just wanted to point out that in Tunisia we have listening in one subject of the back exam, which is music. And that shows that it is feasible. In Australia, in Argentina as well, in Australia, the remotest village, testees in the remotest village get tested on listening because all the national and even regional radios pass on a passage with the whole procedure from, say, 8 o'clock to 25 past.
There are alternatives, by the way. It's not
Okay,
just
so that is feasible.
the PISA exams for administrative the PISA
Sorry,
exam
that's
colleagues.
Australia, not Tunisia.
Why?
There is an application for
What is
that.
the problem with putting something or passing on a passage on national radios or even on CDs? They get a listening test in music. Each exam center, each school, gets a CD together with the official papers and the official exams, and each school has to guarantee that there is a CD player, which is not that much to ask
There
for.
are many alternatives. If we agree on that, but we need to discuss that, and this is going to be in the afternoon. There are many alternatives, and I'm sure that colleagues do not really like. Thanks to talk about these.
Excuse me, one remark. I want to say that only English language is taught with listening. When you teach French or you teach Arabic, there is no listening. So most of the people do not care about teaching listening. Only English language teachers are concerned with this.
Okay. Thank you. So I said that with listening, how about dictation, which has been somehow obliterated from our concern? Dictation is one of the most integrative sub-skills, by the way. Because you'll have to listen. There is the skill of listening, but then there's a whole process and many strategies that you need to mobilize and write this down. You don't need to write it word for word. There is writing that is in there. So, and we can actually evaluate language. We can evaluate many things in that. It's one of the sub-skills that has been really obliterated from our concern for some time, for some reason. Dictation or any variation of it, there is, I don't know if you're aware of the dictocomp, I'm sure colleagues know about this. It's when students listen to or read a passage once or twice, I don't know, you agree on this, and then they write it down. Writing it down using, for example, 3, 4, 5 keywords that the teacher supplies, and they are taken from the listening itself. So it's possible, for example, to evaluate the dictation itself. Right. Now,
I guess the reason why they have been discarded because partly of two things actually. The very first is that spelling and as well as pronunciation are really very much difficult to total out, to mark first, then to total out. You know what happened at national exams, okay? In marking, when we come to marking, it was really difficult to mark because teachers are required to award, say, partial credit. Right. You see the point? Mm-hmm. So that's why they have been discarded.
One of the reasons,
reason.
And we need to discuss these things in the afternoon and tomorrow, I guess. These are the things we need to discuss. I'm just asking questions. I'm not really imposing any idea on anybody or saying that this is right or this is wrong. I'm simply giving my version of the story, if you like, my own analysis of the thing. So, for the reading comprehension, I mean, de jure, what we have on the document, we can assign up to 2 texts, linear and non-linear. But de facto, this is a different story. De facto, we only assign a text, one text, and it's linear. Again, are we exposing the learner to the variety of text, variety of material? Right? So, remember the downward spiral that we've been going through. Right. Some basic questions are hardly asked on for the reading questions. I mean, they are on the document, but they simply have been dropped from the document for one reason or another. I don't know why. We're not using them anymore. For basic education, complete a sentence or paragraph with his, her own words or phrases when the information is not explicitly stated in the text. Now we even stipulate that the word should be written out as it is. We even stipulate this. For secondary school, we do not ask students to complete a sentence or paragraph with own words or phrase. Again, we simply take the word as it is, and in the recommendations, we really wrote it clearly. We do not ask students to identify the topic sentence of a text or paragraph when that is appropriate. I never saw this, for example, when it comes to reading. Never, on our test. We do not ask students to identify the function corresponding to a given state. We do this in listening, but not in reading. We do not ask students to identify the exponent of a given function. We do this in listening, but not in reading as well. So these, I just want to draw your attention to how sub-skills have been dropping one after the other over the years.
This can be well applicable with listening because it depends on the way, on the intonation. Because different sentences can have different functions depending on the intonation. That's why it's generally linked to listening.
I do agree with you. I'm talking about what you have on the document.
Yes, that's true.
I'm simply saying that some of these have been actually...
Okay, because the way you pronounce a statement
It's
can...
not just intonation, because sometimes it's part of it's highly critical, by the way. When you ask your student to identify the function, when that is not that obvious from the function, and you read what is before and what is after, it's also the context. Yes. And you have to give reason. The context. Right. And the context. So, in fair attitudes, when we ask them to circle the words, for example, or moods, but when it comes to figures of speech, this is IQ 20. We don't ask about this. We never ask anything related to figures of speech. And we do not even teach them in class. I mean, it's very easy. They know about irony, they know about sarcasm, they know about these in French. Why not, for example, use them in English? Even when it comes to to teaching itself, they are not there anymore. So, not many questions call on the learner's critical thinking or hone his higher order thinking skills. Unfortunately, most of our question has been really surface level, Most of them are MCQs, false statements to correct, and short constructed response. Short construct. That is, if it's WH question, you simply expect the learner to respond to that, and most of the time, even if the learner responds with one word, and that word is the correct answer, so you just accept it. My question is this: if it is so, why ask it as WH question? Why so? I mean, why not think of it as multiple choice or false statement?
If you just show us sample for the international exam, you don't find HOTS in these exams. Mainly reading comprehension question are multiple choice, and this is for the sake of objectivity of marking. Right. How can you mark, I mean, the question related to, for example, the higher order?
Now, there is a misconception about multiple choice items, is that we think that they are all mots or lots. Well, even a multiple choice question can be a hot, by the way. It can test the high order thinking skill, even a multiple choice item, by the way. I'm just talking about, these are just things we take, that if there is anything that leads to somehow critical thinking, we just omit it for one reason or another. And I'm talking about this, it's because regional commissions, we're always thinking about, they will not have this on the exam. And for our colleagues at the National Commission, they'd say, well, our colleagues would simply find a problem with this and we'll start picking holes in this. And they say it's ambiguous, it's not clear, so let's play it safe and give one that is at the lots or the mots.
The expert, Dave Allen, who studied the Tunisian tests, he gave one reason. He said that teachers have a tendency to test the easiest technique, or they have items rather than the more difficult. So they are there, but teachers have a tendency to choose the.
But this is an international problem.
Yes, right. So no paraphrasing questions, for example, and this is a high order thinking. We do not ask students to paraphrase. Now, probably the item in which we try to see where the students can evaluate the information or not, is in the. When we ask them to react to the text.
And we see how we react.
Now, does the item itself discriminate between the good students, for example, and the less good ones? If there is no partial credit, as Slah said a while ago, if there is no partial marking, it's either 1 or 0. Now, just tell me, what is the difference between a student who gives 3 sound arguments written in very good English, and compare that to a student who just gives one flimsy argument even, but it's there in a very awkward language, and both of them will get 1 by the end. Okay? So problem of partial marking here.
There is a problem of, here we are testing reading comprehension, and if you require much writing, another skill is involved there. The production is being also assessed,
Right.
which is not.
We're not the only ones who are doing this. I mean, other people somewhere else, they are asking students to write not just short constructed response questions, but also longer ones.
Reading comprehension?
Yeah, I mean, the reading comprehension, something like 4 or 5 lines sometimes. And they ask them, when there is something to evaluate, they ask them really to write and to give argument. We're not the only ones who.
Again, problem of validity. I mean,
yeah, and
what's the construct you are testing there? I mean, is it comprehension or the pupil's production, the testee's production?
Yeah, I'm not interested in language. I just said that what's the difference between a student who gives 3 sound arguments and another one who gives just 1 argument, and they all get 1 by the end when there is no partial marking. In other words, this item, the way it is asked, does not discriminate. And there is the idea of discrimination of the item itself. Now, what if, again, these are questions, what if we redesign the test of the reading skill? We think of longer texts. By the way, our texts, I'm sorry, they are dehydrated, something like 300 words and 350 words is not. There isn't really much flesh in the text itself to ask questions about. And with that number of items, if we have 15 items on an arts branch, 15 items almost, we end up asking for every line there should be 1 question on that. Sometimes this does not really helps.
Sometimes it's the choice of the text itself.
It's very important.
There are texts which lend themselves to
To exploitation and others not. Right. There's, I mean, we need to think about varying the material itself. Two or more linear and non-linear texts. And we need to think about varying the sub-skills that target but part of it are the HOTS. At least let's keep up to the 8% that Abdul talked a while ago. I mean, effective questioning in classes, 8%. Is there, I mean, do we have 8% of our questions on our national exams that target the HOTS? This is a question we need to answer.
I have questions to raise.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, could you just let me finish if you don't mind?
Just related to this, what is the difference between the 9th form in reading and in all? The 9th form exam and the back exam. By the way, in some cases, the 9th form exam is more difficult than the back exam. Do our tests in here, if we speak about reading, longer text, etc., do our tests show the progress in learning from the 9th to the back? These are the questions we need to consider, even in the afternoon.
Yeah, I think Abdul answered this a while ago when he talked about achievement and proficiency tests. Because we're not really considering that fact that the test is an achievement test, that students sit for that test after a given number of years of instruction, for example. Okay, this is why a 9th year student can easily sit for a back exam and get, for example, 14 or 15 on that exam. Okay, that's part of it, part of what you're talking about. So why not, again, this is a suggestion, why not include a component of translation artists? I mean, having students translate into their L1 helps actually not only bridge the gap, but helps the learner internalize the systems of both languages. And this is very important because, again, it's strategies that we're talking about. So, for example, one sentence or two or short paragraph, they are doing, for example, this in France, they ask them to translate, for example, a sentence or two or short paragraph into French. So, again, this is...
And we do it at university in Tunisia.
Yeah. Think of it, this is just for debate. I come now to language. Language, we have 3 to 4 tasks, colleagues. These are the ones that we use. Huh? We have gap filling, MCQs, and word formation. That's what we have in the reading. And I mean, do we have this in the back exam? Okay. So in the back exam, we don't have any matching. Some questions are rarely asked, like for example, matching sentence parts to get a paragraph or a dialogue. Back exam, we don't have this. It's 9e. It's the 9e, not the back exam. Back exam.
Yeah, there is always a discussion whether this is considered as being language or writing.
It has been dropped anyway. Is it on the writing? It's not there.
It's not.
It's not. Now, we also did not ask students to express sentences differently as specified in the instruction. I think they were on the exam some...
Yeah, like 15 years ago?
15 years ago, but they are not there anymore.
No, they use it in translation.
Yeah, for example, we don't do this anymore.
Even grammar from a pastor.
For example. Or Hadai when you have the inversion. Right? Language. Let me read this from the document. I'll read it verbatim. Testing the assimilation of lexical and grammatical acquisition in an essentially integrated manner. Now, my question is, does the exclusive use of integrative testing allow the students to demonstrate mastery of the language or not? We have always used it somehow with integrative testing, a paragraph.
Because of these integrative tests, there are tasks and things that the teachers teach and they cannot test at all. You take, for instance, a question tag. They may teach it, but they cannot test it.
And many inversions or whatever. Many things remain untested because of this limited choice.
Now, how about discrete form testing? How about having a combination of both? I mean, we vary the test batteries so that the deficiency of of the one is actually made up for by the other. How about the combination of both? We'll just discuss these things, for example, today. Let me just read a quote by Cannell and Swain that drives the message home for this one. Discrete point tests may be more effective than integrative tests in making the learner aware of and in assessing the learner's control of the separate components and elements of communicative competence. We're still in communicative competence, not just linguistic. Discrete point tests may be more suitable for assessing communicative competence, and integrative ones more suitable for assessing actual communicative performance. These are experts in the field. Okay? Writing, I come to writing. The guided writing, we have developing notes in the paragraph biography, letter, article, and report. Are they there? I simply cross them out because they simply have been written out of our consideration. The free writing, it's almost exclusively argumentative. Almost exclusively argumentative. Let's focus on narrative and informative productions.
A couple of years ago, there was a draft.
Which is good, actually. Which is good. But they asked them to write a paragraph, not even a report. They asked them to write a paragraph, not a report.
But he says exclusively, which means basically that's what we have. I mean, almost exclusive. It's always something argumentative.
Yeah, almost. Almost. It's not always. It's almost.
Yeah, write a narrative, to write expository tests, etc.
Right. We don't have these in our tests. Right. So the negative washback, you know that we do not really focus on these types of texts or others. Now, what if, again, suggestions? What if, in the first task, if you like, we suggest activities that assess the sub-skills of writing and the strategies, because these are important to hone the writing skills. By these sub-skills, I mean, for example, identifying topic sentence, adding or writing a topic sentence, or choosing a topic sentence from a list, or crossing out relevant details, or unscrambling sentences to get a coherent paragraph. These were on our test in the 1990s and in the early noughts, by the way, if you remember. They were on our test, but for one reason or another, they simply ended up by being drunk. Yeah, they are communicating. And they help because we often worry why teachers deal with writing most of the time as a product. Give activities like these and our teachers, I mean, colleagues' teachers will really teach the writing sub-skills. They will think of it as a process part of it.
This will make students hard to progress, not the reverse.
Yeah, part of it.
Even though achievers can start from these activities in order to improve their writing skills.
Right? Still, there is the other side of the coin. For example, reordering and scrambling sentence. This requires the ability of reading also. It's there involved. When to reorder correctly, you need to be
able to read. So it's integrative.
Yes, but you are testing both writing and reading.
Then, one of we always like to teach integratively, or to test integratively. Why test integratively? It's when the learner calls on different skills and different strategies. Now, reading, being able to read and then to write, so it's the same as for writing. When you write, whole process that comes into it. There is language, there is punctuation, there is spelling, there is everything. It's a whole process that comes into play, if you like. So what if for the free writing, for example, we suggest more than one topic and the student chooses one to write about? If we think that writing is choice and voice, if you like, then let's give them real choice. We're simply imposing them, and students get blocked and do not write, and sometimes we worry why. I mean, if there is choice, then probably they can write. I'm simply probably again, I'm not that absolutist. Or what about incorporating different tasks for different writing purposes? For example, narrative, informative, persuasive, short tasks, for example, 1 or 2. Or writing tasks that incorporate an array of stimulus material. By stimulus material, for example, photographs or visuals. We simply said on the document there should be no visual nor a paragraph. If there is, again, a task that is really integrative, it's when you ask a student to read a text, and the picture or the visual is a text, by the way, and transducing that, because we call it the process of transduction, and transducing that into a written text, then again you are really going higher on Bloom's taxonomy and touching those higher levels that Yaakoubi talked about a while ago. Comic strips or poems or whatever. We simply give linear text, and most of the time they are either narrative or narrative and argumentative, or expository sometimes. What if this is for all the tests? What if we provide the test sampler? Why not giving samples of all task types that we suggested in the ongoing document and give them to teachers? Teachers sometimes, because they do not have, I know that there is the general curriculum that has been written, at least the first draft of it, and Saïdi can actually concur or disconfirm this. How to assess the 21st century skills that are on the general curriculum. And they will be there, by the way, the 21st century skills. There is what we call l'éducation à la citoyenneté, l'éducation au développement durable. Okay, that is teaching to sustainable development. How can we teach critical thinking, communication, all the 4 C's and the 21st century skills that you know about? How can we evaluate them? If we do not really start the debate now, then by the time we are asked to bring in our contribution, we will really find trouble. So I guess they are going to be on the curriculum, and we need to start thinking about this right now. Yeah. What can we use standard and benchmarks, for example, in life skills education programs? We need to talk about the portfolio, how to test or to assess those high order thinking skills, project work, and many of the alternative modes like of assessment. We're talking about the 21st century skills. And we'd like our students to be computer literate, if you like. And we have not really asked the question whether digital assessment is possible in this country or not. We've been talking about this. So it's coming, whether we like it or not, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, but it's coming. I don't know, but it's coming. So I think we need to start debating this right now. Right? Conclusion, I just have one conclusion. The only thing we need to do is to topple the spiral. What I mean by this is that we need to raise the standards, have higher expectations. This will have better bearing on the classroom instruction, kind of positive washback. This will help our learners have higher proficiency level. Thank you very much.
Thank you.